This is where Lee Rotatori was found murdered back in 1982. 40 years later, Council Bluffs police have named a suspect, but in turn find that his murder is still a mystery.
It happened in Gold Coast, Australia. There was a beautiful young married woman who was just 21. But she didn't know that her happy journey would come to such an abrupt end. What it resulted in was a 37-year-old nightmare for her family. In today's video, we'll look at two such cold cases. Let us now look into the 37-year-old case that happened in Australia. It was one of Australia's most prolonged cold cases. Before it was revealed that the same murderer had murdered another lady 2 years later, the man accused of raping and murdering Gold Coast woman Linda Reid in one of the state's longest cold case killings pled guilty.
Now be revealed 18 months after Linda's murder, Troy O'Meara murdered another woman in another random attack with striking similarity.
In December 1983, Miss Reid, 21, was last seen taking a lunch break from her retail job at Pacific Fair in Broadbeach. 3 days after she vanished, her corpse was discovered in a thicket near Gavin. According to the court, the murderer tied her hands behind her back, raped her, took her into the jungle, and forced her head into a stream bed. Her official autopsy said that she died of drowning, smothering, strangling, or suffocation after inhaling dirt and debris into her lungs. The court was informed that 2 years after killing Miss Reid, the murderer murdered another lady, Vanessa O'Brien, 22, in Brisbane, under identical circumstances. However, it was not until 2018 that O'Meara was prosecuted for Miss Reid's death, making it one of the state's most prolonged cold cases. This day has been 37 years in the making for the Reid family, Crown Prosecutor Jody Wooldridge said.
Making it known what has happened to myself, Nancy, and Phil.
In addition to the court, Miss Wooldridge delivered victim impact statements from Miss Reid's widower, Robert Reid, and her mother, Nancy Fain.
We just want to thank the police for never giving up.
Troy O'Meara was already serving a life sentence for the murder of Vanessa O'Brien in 2018, when he was charged with the murder of Reid after 35 years. O'Meara pled guilty to her rape and murder in almost no time. During the sentencing hearing, the court heard that O'Meara was 17. He approached Miss Reid in her car at random, threatened her, and forced her to drive to an isolated location. Justice Glenn Martin considered that O'Meara was a minor at the time of the crimes and wondered whether he should be prosecuted as an adult when deciding O'Meara's punishment. He also thought about how much time O'Meara had spent in prison for his previous offenses. A strict mathematical formula could not establish the sentence, but another life sentence would be excessive, according to Justice Martin. If the defendant had committed the two murders as an adult in current times, he would have to serve a minimum of 30 years in jail. He stated, "A sentence of life imprisonment is not acceptable since the defendant would have to serve an additional 15 years in prison before being eligible for release." Considering these, only in July 2022, O'Meara will be able to petition for parole. The prosecution requested the judge to agree that on the day he murdered Miss Reid, O'Meara was determined to go out and kill a lady at random, as he acknowledged to police after he murdered Miss O'Brien. Justice Glenn Martin then responded by saying that he did not need such admission to determine his motivation. The nasty purpose he harbored at the time is sufficient to illustrate how he abused her in the short time before her horrific death. He added, Justice Martin recognized O'Meara's guilty plea, but he stated it did not reflect regret. The petition does show some cooperation. The request comes after a long period of denial, he said. The cold case investigation team's detective, Senior Sergeant Tara Cantwell, stated the murder had been investigated for 35 years. When fingerprint evidence initially identified O'Meara as a suspect in 2014, she noted the inquiry shifted emphasis. Over the following 4 years, the team used modern forensic techniques to re-examine 150 exhibits and re-interview more than 100 witnesses. Witnesses' cooperation and patience with Queensland Police and Linda Reed's family and friends have been critical in ensuring Linda's justice, she said. Detective Senior Sergeant Cantwell applauded the detectives who never gave up outside of court. "I'd like to thank many members of the Queensland Police Service for their hard work over the years," she added. Robert Reed, Miss Reed's widower, broke down in tears as he praised the police, prosecutors, and the community for sticking by them. "I'd also want to express my gratitude to the witnesses who came forward," he said, "and the media for putting it out there, letting people know what's going on." Let us now look at how Lee Rotatori's murder was finally resolved in 1982 without any arrests and warrants. Authorities were summoned to the Best Western Frontier Motor Lodge in Council Bluffs, Iowa, on the afternoon of June 25, 1982, after receiving allegations of a suspicious death. According to Iowa Cold Cases, a hotel employee discovered the corpse of a lady in room 106 at roughly 12:30 p.m. It looked like she had been killed. When police arrived, they found a deceased lady resting on the floor next to the bed on her back. According to Iowa Cold Cases, she was wearing pajamas and lying in a pool of blood. The lady, eventually identified as Lee Rotatori, 32, had been stabbed to death inside her hotel room. On the other hand, authorities found no indication of forced entry or any fight in the room. Rotatori moved to Council Bluffs from Nunica, Michigan, in the weeks leading up to her death for a position at Edmondson Hospital, where she had recently been appointed as the new food service director. She intended to remain at the Best Western while attending her new job's training sessions and orientation. However, Gerald Stanley Jerry Namke, her husband, arranged for their mobile home to be transported from Michigan and for him to meet his wife in Council Bluffs. Lee Rotatori began her orientation at Edmondson Hospital on Monday, June 21, according to the Gazette. She went boating with several of her new co-workers on Thursday. Rotatori stopped for dinner at McDonald's at the end of her journey, which she carried back to her hotel room. According to Iowa Cold Cases, authorities suspect Rotatori was slain in the early morning hours of the next day. Dr. Samuel ROSA, the medical examiner for Pottawatomie County, found that Rotatori was murdered by a single knife wound entering her chest and puncturing her heart. ROSA told the Daily Nonpareil that the murder may have been sexually motivated, but there was no definitive evidence to support that view. Unfortunately, little information pointed to a single suspect or person of interest. According to the Gazette, authorities first assumed the Best Western's position between Interstates 80 and 29 might hint at someone traveling through the region. However, they didn't rule out the possibility that it was someone from the area. Detectives also collaborated with Michigan State Police to see whether anyone connected to Rotatori's history was involved. Rotatori's spouse had a dark background and garnered unwanted attention during her murder, despite officials determining he had a valid alibi. As per Iowa Cold Cases, Jerry Nemke, Rotatori's second husband, was convicted of the 1960 murder of Marilyn Duncan. Jerry Nemke, who was 17, was first detained in connection with the killings of 3 women in Starved Rock, Illinois. Even though his involvement in the Starved Rock killings was never confirmed, Nemke confessed to Duncan's murder and was condemned to death. However, the Illinois Supreme Court eventually granted him a second trial. Nemke was found guilty and sentenced to 75 years in prison after his second trial. In August 1978, he married Lee Rotatori after serving only a fraction of his sentence. Several of Lee Rotatori's personal belongings, including her pocketbook and some jewelry, were reported stolen from her room at the time of the murder. On the other hand, authorities did not feel robbery was the motive. According to the Daily Nonpareil, former police captain Aldon Jones stated the hotel room was not dirty and nobody was hunting for something. According to the Daily Nonpareil, authorities also investigated Rotatori's background, but according to all reports, she was well liked in her neighborhood and never had any problems. According to Iowa Cold Cases, Michigan State Police Detective Richard Griffin stated that he did not talk to anyone who didn't like her. Despite their best efforts, authorities could not identify a person of interest or a suspect in Lee Rotatori's death. A reward was also offered for any information leading to an arrest in the case. The authorities unfortunately never got any helpful information. The case finally went cold, and it remained unresolved for over 4 decades. Sources claimed in February 2022 that they had finally solved Rotatori's murder using evidence recovered from the crime site in 1982. Authorities sent over evidence acquired at Lee Rotatori's murder scene to a state crime lab in 2001 for additional examination. The lab used the evidence to generate a DNA profile and determined that it belonged to a man. Unfortunately, none of the DNA profiles in the local or national databases matched the DNA. Between 2001 and 2018, the profile was submitted to databases many times, but no matches were obtained. In 2018, however, Police Captain Todd Wedham examined matching the shape with genealogical DNA databases. DNA was finally sent to the Virginia-based business Parabon Nanolabs, which compared the DNA to profiles supplied to a variety of genealogical websites. A college student called Eric Schubert, who specializes in genealogy DNA, became aware of the case and volunteered to assist in identifying the suspect's family using existing databases. Schubert could locate the suspect's great-grandparent, despite not finding a precise match. Authorities contacted numerous known great-grandparent descendants who agreed to DNA testing. The findings of these tests assisted investigators in narrowing down the suspect list to 2 brothers. They determined that Thomas O. Freeman, the eldest of the 2 brothers, was the most likely assailant. Using a DNA sample provided by Freeman's daughter, they could validate their findings. Authorities stated in February 2022 that Thomas O. Freeman, a truck driver in 1982, had killed Lee Rotatori.
Back in 2011, when we initially started it, I started doing some DNA collection of, who you would think might be the,
Detectives suspect Freeman committed the crime while traveling through Council Bluffs. Even though Rotatori's killer was ultimately identified, he will never face charges for her murder since Freeman was dead a few months after Rotatori was killed. Thomas O. Freeman's body was discovered in a shallow burial in a rural location outside of Compton, Illinois on October 30, 1982. Investigators believe the guy was shot and buried 3 months before his corpse was discovered. The assassination of Freeman was never solved. Authorities believe that identifying him as Lee Rotatori's killer will also help them solve his case. They have cause to assume Freeman's assassination was connected to Rotatori's. Police Captain Todd Wedham told the Daily Nonpareil that he is not a big believer in coincidences. According to him, Jerry Nemke, Rotatori's husband, was possibly implicated in Freeman's murder. According to Wedham, the fact that Nemke's known past includes being in the region where our suspect resided and died strengthens suspicions of his participation, that he could have had anything to do with it. Even though Nemke is a person of interest in Freeman's murder, he died in 2019 and is no longer accessible for interrogation. Whoever did the murder seems to be no longer alive. Maybe that made this cold case get solved. Hit a like and tap the subscribe button to see more cold case nightmares solved like this.